Welcome to the Real Resiliency podcast by TLC VR, where we discuss real resiliency journeys from people like you. Here are your hosts, Dr. Robert Goldman, Dr. Paul Meller, Dr. Webb Garrison, and Anika Kazembe.
Welcome to the Real Resiliency, a podcast in which people discuss their journey to resiliency. I'm Dr. Paul Meller, Chief Innovation Officer at TLC Virtual Resiliency, and I'm here with my colleagues Anika Kazembe, Dr. Robert Goldman, Dr. Webb Garrison. We are so fortunate today to have an absolutely interesting, fascinating person, Eric Kussin, who's going to talk about his journey towards his resiliency. Webb, why don't you get us started?
Sure, absolutely. So Eric, I want to welcome you to the podcast, and I really want to express our appreciation for your joining us. I know a bit about your story, but I'm not confident that our listeners or viewers know anything about you or your story. So if you could start out by telling a little bit about, telling us a little bit about you, and also telling a little bit about how you see resiliency as an aspect of your journey and your emerging journey. So,
sure, absolutely. Thank you all for having me. Although I could run down the whole list of names again, but I'll say to the group, the concept of resiliency in the construct of mental health, mental wellness, mental performance, mental toughness, I think all of which oftentimes get mishmashed together erroneously as one thing. I don't know that I necessarily focused on it so much as I think we're all wired in different ways and unique ways and have certain strengths and certain things that get us over the top. One of the things about me, from the time I was a little kid, I was just the most competitive SOB that there was, right? And I don't know why and where, because my parents are not athletes. My parents are, my father was a principal, my mother was a language teacher. They don't play sports at all. My father could barely throw a baseball overhand. He has to throw it back to me underhand. So where that came from, I don't know. I mean, I have two other brothers and we're wired in a similar way. So it's in the genetic lineage somewhere, but I guess it skipped a generation with my parents. And so from a resiliency perspective, I didn't know the term resiliency. It was more, I looked at this, the day-to-day of what I needed to get through and what I wanted to get done. And I was just juiced and motivated by beating myself from the day before. If we were playing, and it's so far away to think about this with kids now, but we would come home after school every day and play sports. And if we were playing one-on-one and I would win 11-0, I'd want to play 1 against 3, right? Because I wanted to prove that I could beat 3 people, right? Now, part of that is you're taller than a lot of kids, so that's certainly helpful. But it was just like, instead of the winning being what I was going after, it was the winning against all odds that excited me. And I think as my career took shape and progressed, not being in the space of mental health, mental toughness, mental performance, being in the space of sports and sports business and sports industry, starting at the NBA league office and then going to work for WNBA teams and NBA teams and NHL teams. The roles that always excited me the most were the ones where they told you can't get that done, right? So it was building a team marketing and business operations group from scratch at the NBA league office when we were told that there's no way that teams will collaborate with each other because they treat themselves like they're competitors in the 30 different markets. And then when I went to the WNBA, it was, you're going to start up a WNBA franchise, the first ever in Chicago, that doesn't have NBA ownership to back it. There's no way that people in the summer are going to be willing to go inside in a crappy arena, UIC Pavilion, and buying sports tickets to watch women's basketball right at the height of when the Michael Jordan era just ended from the Bulls, right? So love that they were told us it couldn't get done. Then I go out to Phoenix with the Suns, and the team had just been on this crazy good run. Amari Stoudemire and Steve Nash and just 7 seconds or less Suns, if anyone remembers that era of basketball. And then the team took a downturn, and so they had 5,000 empty seats per game, but they had a sellout streak they wanted to keep alive. And so I got hired as a group sales director to fill those 5,000 seats per game and keep that sellout streak going. And I guess the narrative that I'm sharing, because I usually don't get asked this question about resiliency, is I remember, when leading staffs, what came to me naturally was saying to my staff, what story are we going to tell? That's always kind of how I positioned what our day-to-day was. You're not here day-to-day to pick up the phone and call someone and form a relationship. You're not here day-to-day to fill a seat or drive revenue. You're here to tell a bigger picture, right? And if you can drive this narrative around understanding what the back against the wall picture is that we're trying to tell, now everyone feels like they're part of a larger group and in it together, and you're willing to help each other out and support each other and come to each other's back. And so that led to then going out to New Jersey with the Devils, became their VP of sales and service, another back against the wall situation, because grew up an Islander fan that had a decent fan base, was in the shadow of the Rangers in a market where everyone loves the team and it's sold out at MSG all the time, in the shadow of Philly that had a long history of wins and filling that arena. And I come to the Devils and there's 4,000 season ticket holders and being told we have to fill this arena. And 3 years of working hard, we end up making it to the Stanley Cup final against the LA Kings, unfortunately lose, but same type of idea is building a staff where they said we couldn't get it done, and we build our season ticket base to 11,000. You'll see why I'm giving a sports narrative to this in a story about resiliency and mental health, but it leads to an opportunity with the Florida Panthers, where I go down there to be their chief revenue officer. So one step away from my dream job, which is being a team president. And I come down there, they gut out the entire business operations group, and they give two of us a chance to build the organization from scratch. So there's a guy named Matt Caldwell, never worked in sports before, but Goldman Sachs background, military background. And he was someone that the owners, Vinny Viola, who bought the team, who also had a military background, that's why he trusted Matt so much, brought him in there saying, we're going to get this done. And then so I get hired as the number two there. Like, you're going to be the tactical guy because you've worked in sports to do the X's and O's. And so single guy, mid-30s, living in South Beach, new ownership group, exciting place to bring the team because Florida sports has not exactly been a hotbed of winning. So you only got upside to go from there. And then 6 months into my tenure, and I'll stop after this to take a breath if you guys have questions, it's like, bam, the rug gets pulled out from underneath me and my brain and my body just stop functioning. And so that's where the idea of how am I going to have to use my resiliency in other ways started to come into play.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, what you're saying is extraordinary, that actually this drive, this competitive drive, this drive toward mastery, and this drive toward facing obstacles and challenges. I mean, it sounds like that's one of the things that really was central to your identity and central to your motivation, and really informed your career. And
but has a downside to it also as well,
yeah,
right?
Everything has a shadow, right? And some say that the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. And so, that kind of, the way that I see it is that the kind of resiliency that you're describing requires overriding certain systems. It is using the will to override certain emotions, certain awarenesses, various things. And then at a certain point, if we're not taking care of those internal pieces, a lot of times the bottom will fall out. And it sounds like that's kind of where you were headed with this narrative. Yeah, go ahead.
But the amazing thing is you don't know it at the time, right? Because when you're younger, 20s into 30s, and for different people, it happens at different ages, right? So the neural circuitry starts to fray at different times. For me, it was mid-30s when it happened, but I didn't know from what you just described. So in my mind, when I always show the pictures of smiles when I was in Florida, smiles when I was in Phoenix and living in Scottsdale and it being surrounded by bars in every corner, like those smiles were real, because oftentimes we hear in the space, oh, that person's wearing a mask, they're covering up. I felt happy because I was waking up every day getting the dopamine hits going from, I love what I'm doing. This is what I was meant to do. I couldn't imagine doing it anything different. And I think when it's fool's gold a little bit, because when you're so hyper-focused on them, now take me out of the equation. Think of the athlete on the field who's the first one in the film session and the last one to leave at night from the weight room. Think of the doctor who's studying and is in residency, right? And is looked at as class, pet, teacher's pet. Look at the partner or the paralegal who wants to become partner at a law firm and is willing to, donate extra time and spend extra time learning about case law in a certain area, right? Like they all look different from the outside, but they all have similar pathologies in that it's such an intense focus. And it comes from a place of joy, and it comes from a place of enjoyment. But the question is, what are you also avoiding? And right. And I didn't know that, because when I started to fail, when I say fail, my brain and my body, I woke up one morning and it was like trying to push myself out of quicksand to get out of the bed. It was like wearing cinder blocks on my feet to walk. My closet looked like a bomb had gone off. I couldn't make a decision whether I should wear a button-down shirt or a t-shirt. I couldn't remember the names of my nieces as I was looking at a picture of them. I mean, scary, scary stuff. And I think what a lot of people do from a resiliency standpoint, which is, but work has been clicking for me. So I'm just going to get my butt into the office, and whatever I'm feeling and not able to think about right now, and whatever is failing me will come back when I sit in front of the computer and I start typing again. And, reference that doesn't always work with kids who are in school now because they weren't old enough to remember the game. I say that I sit in front of my desk at work, and it looked like it was light brights on my screen instead of, even
Yes.
Gmail,
Yes.
sparkles, right? And, I had a speech I had to give that night to prospects that were coming in the arena. And I just remember thinking, I can't come up with a phrase to share about the direction that the team is going to go in. What am I going to share with these prospects to get them excited about joining the team? And I was pacing before they came into the suite, and they got up there. And fortunately, the owner and the team president that I mentioned before, Matt and Vinny, were there. And I addressed the group by looking at an index card where I'd written down, "Hi, my name is Eric Kussin. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer with the Panthers. It's great to meet you." And then I just go, "Here's Matt and Vinny. They're going to take it from here." And I walked out. And I've never quit anything before in my life. And even hearing myself use that term quit, here's a fascinating piece of this. There's a difference between mental toughness and mental health, right? Mental toughness is, the team lost. I'm pissed off that we're not going to be going to the playoffs, but I got to put a rah-rah speech together to get these fans excited about coming on board and joining us. Mental health is there's an accumulation of stuff. We'll get into what that stuff is in a second. And now my neural circuitry has frayed. Without going into detail on it, let's think about what happened with Simone Biles. Let's think about what happened with Kalina, the ice skater, right? Mm-hmm. Now my neural circuitry is failing me, and I can't continue there. No matter how hard I want to push myself, my brain is not letting me do it. I don't have it in me. And so I go back to the office, and Vinny and Matt come up to me after the game. "Is everything okay? How can we help you? Please let us know how we can be supportive." And I said, "I don't know what's going on with me. I'm not being a good employee for you, and I'm not even being a good human being for myself. Something is not right. I don't know if I have a brain tumor, a traumatic brain injury that just finally came to fruition from playing sports growing up, but something's not clicking here." And Vinny, having the West Point background, it's the closest I'll ever feel to what it's like probably being supported, being a member of the military. He said, "We never leave a soldier out in the battlefield. Take as much time as you need, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, come back, hit the ground running." And when I heard 3 months, that's the only thing I took from what he said, because your identity is tied to what you do day to day. So how am I going to get back to doing that thing, which I've been known for and I've known myself as for so long? Well, we grow up taking an antibiotic when we have this thing called strep throat, bronchitis, and pneumonia, right? So what we're indoctrinated into from a young age is, I don't feel right, so I take this pill that makes me feel better. I sleep and I lay in the couch or in my bed for a couple of days. I sweat out whatever fever I have, and then I'm back to being myself. And so you combine that with what we see in pharmaceutical commercials, where it's, okay, a sad face with a gray cloud and a ball and chain connected to it. Now all of a sudden, 15 seconds in, when a pill is introduced, becomes a smiley face, the clouds go away, the sky is blue, the birds are chirping, the chain's no longer on the person, and everything's great. And I didn't expect it to be that easy, but I expected the medication to be something that fixes what was told to me is this chemical imbalance, which is, okay, the chemical imbalance is something genetic that just came up out of nowhere, even though we just had a short conversation about the stuff that builds up in our life. So I spend, and I'll stop after this for a second, I spent 2.5 years laying in bed, staring at the ceiling, not watching TV, not listening to podcasts, barely moving, having to be reminded to eat, as these doctors tried me on over 50 different psychotropic drug combinations. Right. And from a resiliency perspective, someone who would be looking at me laying in that bed would go, what's his lazy ass doing laying in a bed? In my mind, I was on a treadmill every second of every single day, trying to fight my way through that awful thing I was feeling, hoping that what I was working hard on, which was trying the medications out to see which was the right combination, was eventually going to make me better. So it's funny what we put in the bucket of resiliency, because I thought that was being resilient in and of itself, and I'm waiting for the right medication to pop me out and fix me.
Right. Well, then you were being a really good patient, right? I mean, you were being a good compliant patient, doing what the doctor said, with the hope and the faith that this would fix whatever the problem was. And as you said, it's a very common cultural idea. We're indoctrinated into this. If you watch a television show, inevitably, but on commercials, there's almost always at least one drug commercial. So it's a pervasive bias that we have in our culture, and unfortunately, that moves away from a resiliency perspective in some senses, because it suggests that that merely by taking a medication we can experience improvement. And as you're saying, 2.5 years of trying this, you were still suffering. So I'm sorry, Anika, I know that you wanted to say something as well.
No, Eric, wow is what I can say for now. My question to you is, I understood your story to mean you were perfectly within your normal limits as you knew them one day, and then woke up the next day to this new being. I connected that correctly?
Look, looking back on it, and obviously still have more of the story to share, but there were probably signs that were there that I could have heeded. But I think what we do as human beings, right? Like that story about you put the frog in boiling water and it jumps out, but you put the frog in room temperature water and you slowly turn up the flame, the frog boils to death. I was that frog in the slowly turned up flame that wasn't noticing the differences. Mm-hmm. So when you're still proficient at what you're doing, which in my case was Eric, the sports executive, not a big deal that losing interest in playing on my own rec league teams was going away. Not a big deal that I didn't want to see my friends to hang out socially. Not a big deal that I stopped going to the gym. You justify that because the thing that's the core to what you do, if that's still clicking, everything else is fine.
I get it. Did anyone close to you say, Eric, are you okay? Did something happen, or did you notice anything, or anyone noticed anything?
What I think it was by the industry that you work in, right, is specific to each person. I was constantly moving markets every 2 or 3 years, right? So whereas all my friends grew up in New York, went to school in and around New York, or Florida, someplace where they go, or Michigan, they come back to New York after school. So I was like the one person, by the way, working at the NBA league office out of school, thinking this is a dream job. I'm never going to leave New York. And then all of a sudden you go the team route and then you start traveling around. So in fairness to the people who didn't notice it, I'm able to show this proficiency in going to the office and staying there till 1 a.m. That's how they see me. They're not going to think anything differently because in the role that they see me, I'm performing in that case.
Yeah, makes sense.
Well,
Thank you.
And just to speak to that, that's also, I would say, unfortunately, one of the images that we get in our culture as to kind of the proto-male identity. That primarily as men, we are defined as workers, and so as long, like you're saying, as long as we're proficient in that area, nothing else matters quite so much. So tell us a little bit about what happened after that 2.5 years, and how you shifted out of that really catatonic state.
That's really what it was. So I'm told to do TMS therapy, transcranial magnetic stimulation. I do 23 sessions, 23 days in a row. The night of the 23rd until the morning of the 24th, I can't fall asleep. And I find myself, I'll like show you as I'm doing it, I'm sitting on my hands at 4 a.m, stopping myself from lunging at this bottle in front of me. The first ever situation I'd ever experienced a suicidal ideation before. My mind was playing on repeat like a magnetic pole. Swallow that bottle of pills, swallow that bottle of pills, swallow that bottle of pills. I'd never thought about a bottle of pills before in my life. Where did that thought come from? Which we can come back to. So fortunately, I called it 5% of my brain. I now know it more as my prefrontal cortex fighting with my emotional centers and actually having a rational thought to fight the impulse error message that I was able to say to my parents, you got to get me somewhere because I can't stop myself from self-harm. And if you leave me alone, something's going to happen. So I go inpatient. I'll leave out the name of the hospital in fairness to them, to a psych ward that's a well-known, supposedly top of the line psych ward. And I meet with the attending psychiatrist the first day, and she just looks at my chart, and I'm looking up at her top doctor plaques on the wall. And she just goes, Eric, you've tried everything there is. Your last resort is to do ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy. For the people out there listening, is also known as shock therapy. I knew it as shock therapy, so that's where my mind played it. And in 2017, you're not calling up your friends. You're not even 2022 calling up your friends right now. There's not many people to call and be like, hey, when you were offered shock therapy, did it work for you? And did you do it? Like, it's not a common thing to have a discussion about, and there's not a lot of conversation about it. And even when, I'm giving a little more detail now, when I laid down the first time I got the shock therapy, which is from a different psychiatrist than the person who recommended that I get it, I turned with the mouthpiece in my mouth with the cuff monitor on me, and I go, how does this work? How does it make me feel better? And he goes, we don't really know. He goes, it's a last. He goes,
well, that's comforting. Oh my God.
Yeah. He said, we gave it to epileptic patients in the 70s, I think it was, and hoping to reverse their seizures. And it didn't reverse their seizures, but anecdotally, they came back and said that they were feeling better. So in my mind, as much as my mind was messed up, I'm thinking to myself, so in other words, you're giving me a treatment that hasn't been like scientifically proven to work with subjective feelings of how people feel without even really being able to measure that, like on a blood test or something like that. And hoping that I wake up from this propofol, which Michael Jackson died from, like, and like I'll feel better that next day, right? And the other scary thing was there was no one else on my psych ward floor who was getting shock therapy. So there's 29 other patients, some staying long, some coming in and out quick, and I don't have anyone to lean on and be like, hey, how was your session 1 compared to your session 2? None of that. And so I do the 5 weeks, the 12 sessions of shock therapy, and I leave the hospital feeling no better than I had the previous 2.5 years, essentially thinking my life is over unless Merck or Pfizer invents some miracle pill that's going to pop me out of this, because that's all I'd been told works, right? Mm-hmm. And where the story turns, and obviously is the work that you guys all do, is I met a woman who practices a term that I didn't know at the time, integrative psychology. And in specifics, she worked with integrative breathing practices. And she sat me down on her couch, and unlike all these other doctors I'd been to for the 2.5 years prior, where the questions and the chronology of the appointments were always the same. Didn't matter if it was a half hour, an hour and a half. The first part of the appointment was always, nice to meet you, Eric. What are your symptoms? And I'd list my symptoms. Based on your symptoms, here's your diagnosis. That was always the second part. I was diagnosed with everything from melancholic depression to anhedonic depression to PTSD, OCD, ADD, ADHD. So every specialist found my way from my non-functional brain to fit into their category of what they'd studied. And then the third part was always, well, based on your diagnosis, here's how we treat it. And that's where the 52 different pill combinations came from. Wow. And she treated it very differently. And now looking back on it, it's obviously, it's a psychoanalyst tool in and of itself. But at the time, it didn't feel like it. It was, Eric, just tell me about you, the person. You don't have to answer any questions for me at all this whole session. This next hour is for you to tell me about you and your life so I can get to know you. And when I say that's something that how you help psychoanalyze someone is, it's a very non-confrontational way to hear how the brain velcros one thing to the next. As you're sharing your narrative, how are you telling what the story is of what happened to you, essentially? And so the story there is, I'll tell the quick version of it. I just started going into my memories. Oh, when I was 8 years old, my older brother broke his femur bone and was put in a body cast for a year and homeschooled. Healed from that, and a month later got diagnosed with ALL, children's form of leukemia. So 5 years of chemo and radiation. Miraculously goes into remission, but he's on the Meadowbrook Parkway with his friends in a Jeep Wrangler, open top, open back, no seatbelt. Car loses control. He flies out of the back, lands on the Meadowbrook Parkway, cracks his head open, loses partial vision in his eyes, in ICU for a month. Heals from that, goes to college, feeling a pain in his knee. Blood tests come back that his cancer's returned from childhood. Now they have to give him a stronger chemo regimen. He's doing a good job on the cancerous cells, but it's also beating up all of his healthy cells. Sends his body, unfortunately, into septic shock into a coma. He's in a coma for 3 months. We don't know if he's going to wake or if he's going to have any brain activity. Sitting there waiting for some kind of outcome. Miracle, wakes, full cognitive faculties about him. Asks if the Yankees won the World Series. Somehow he remembered that in 1999. But his kidneys fail from the rigor of the septic shock. Needs to go on dialysis. We all get tested to see who's the closest match. My father donates a kidney to him. That all ends. I get that job at the NBA league office right out of school. And in that first year, 3 of my close friends passed away back to back to back of either misdiagnosed or undiagnosed heart conditions. So all the things that you all were just bringing up of, did you notice signs? I'm 35 with my brain falling apart, being told that I have chemical imbalances and I need medications to fix the chemical imbalance. Meanwhile, I'm sitting in this woman's chair after 2.5 years of that hell, just thinking that I'm telling her a story about my life that's happening from the ages of 8 to 22. And she stops me and she goes, what else happened to you as a child and a young adult that impacted your mental health that we need to know about? So I just shot back and I go, what are you talking about? What happened to me 13 years ago? And I didn't even go into more, have anything to do with my mental health. Right. So happy to keep going from there, but that's kind of, that was
right.
the first epiphany
Eric,
for me.
you know what strikes me is that you go from this place of so high that you're saying, I'm happy all the time because I'm doing what I like, which actually sounds like you're charged all the time because you're doing what you like. And then you follow a path that's kind of laid out, but not one that you chose. And it took you down further and down further and down further and down further. And then you go through these treatments because that's what you're supposed to do. And again, you're kind of following this path. It's almost like going down a whirlpool. It keeps taking you down and down, and you end up, at an integrative practice, not even by choice, but because that was the next person on this whirlpool heading down. And that changed your life. So
It
how
changed
out
my
of
life.
control did you feel at that point in time?
Well, I questioned her theory. Like she made me read the book by Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score.
Body Keeps the Score, yeah.
I'm internalizing this. And my first, even before I read the book, I go, so let me get this straight. All you need is a front row seat to watch things happen to other people in your life, and that impacts your mental health. So then I go, okay, I'm 35. Take me out of the equation. Take your average 15-year-old. Watching things happen to other people, fine. The average 15-year-old who watches their parents get into fights, get a divorce, watches their parents lose their job and potentially lose the house, watches their two best friends' friendship dissolve because they get into a fight, watches their best friend go through a relationship breakup and be crushed by it, watches their best friend being bullied on the schoolyard or verbally abused, or having their friend come up to them and tell them that they're being sexually abused, or watch their friend deal with the sickness of a young loved one or the loss of a young loved one prematurely, right? Like, I don't know a 15-year-old, let alone a 35-year-old, 55-year-old, 85-year-old who hasn't been through one summer, many of those things. If that's what mental health is, and that's how mental health gets impacted, there's not a person on this planet whose mental health hasn't been impacted. And that was kind of, to Paul's point about, going down the drain, but then kind of coming back up and finding purpose in a different way and drive in a different way. The epiphany for me was, I had this woman tell me it was last resort when I was in the hospital. Now I have a woman telling me that this is how mental health gets impacted. And by the way, there's these brain-body connection exercises you can do to start to pull yourself back up out of that drain, and you have control over it. holy shit, I've now got my story, I've got the relationships that I've got in the sports world, and I've got ways to learn different modalities that I can teach people and help people so that we can change the narrative away from, and there's skeptics about why the narrative is the way that it is. And I can either go down that rabbit hole or not, but we're told for so long, and this is what I notice on these websites, 1 in 5 people are mentally ill. Okay, if you're trying to normalize the conversation by saying that 20% of people, what you're really doing is you're telling 80% of the population you're healthy, fine, normal, and okay. There's nothing to see here. Don't worry about mental health. So
Right.
that's the number one. Then number two is all these campaigns are stop the stigma, break the stigma, erase the stigma. That's a great rallying cry for those of us who are in the space. Like, oh, let's all rally around that. It's and I might sound mean when I'm saying this. It is the worst campaign that you can create for trying to change the mind of people who don't understand what mental health is, because the term stigma means that human beings form unfair opinions and judgments about other human beings. When you're saying stop, and break, that's a command to those people to reverse course on what they're doing. That doesn't bring people together. That takes this binary topic and moves people further apart from one another. And then the final piece was the way that celebrity stories were being shared. Britney Spears and Lindsay Lohan before there was social media, and now Kanye West and Antonio Brown and Simone Biles. It's always, hey, you're not alone. Celebrities go through it too. Britney Spears has depression. She's part of the 1 in 5 group. And then you link to the article and it's like, Britney Spears has depression, shaves her head. Lindsay Lohan has anxiety, dresses like a hot mess. Antonio Brown is out of his mind, runs off the football field with his shirt off. You can't get people to take this topic seriously on the current narratives that are out there. And there's no one working to change those narratives, because all celebrity stories do is reinforce the very same narratives that have been laid for so long. Right. When we get someone to raise their hand, I'll use Michael Phelps, who's, we look at as, oh, he's a champion for what he did. Michael Phelps' message is, I'm Michael Phelps. I had depression and suicidal thoughts. Use Talkspace. Does that share any vulnerability? Does that help anyone relate and connect to what Michael Phelps went through as a child? What his relationship with his parents was like? What any breakups that he had? Did he lose someone early on in his family? So we're so kind of on a 180 from where we need to be in terms of changing perception, because people still don't understand what mental health is. They equate mental health with mental illness, and they think that mental illness is a genetic thing that's wrong with you, and you either have it or you don't. We got a long way to go.
Well, right. I agreed. And, just to weigh in on that whole issue of defining what mental illness is, ask 5 clinicians, you'll get 5 different answers. It's not like in a doctoral program. I mean, look, I've been practicing for almost 30 years. I just turned 50 a while ago. So for more than half of my life, I've been in this field, and I teach psychopathology. And one of the things that I teach in psychopathology really is question what mental health is. I mean, not what of course, what mental health is. Question what mental illness is. When someone thinks that a particular diagnosis qualifies them as mentally ill, it simply plays off these stereotypes that these stigmatized representations that we have in our mind. And just as a side note, the word ill, okay, if you look at the etymology of that word, if you look at where that word comes from, it actually comes from the same root as the word evil. So embedded in that word is actually something that is a little bit deeper and has more to do with moral judgment than mental health, let's say.
That's it. I didn't know that. And it stands to reason. I mean, we hear terms like committed suicide versus died by suicide, right? And so evil versus a crime that someone committed, And I think that there's no blood test for depression. There's no blood test for anxiety. And so it's taking this chaotic thing that's going on and trying to put order to it. Meanwhile, I'll ask the 4 of you on this call, like, have you ever met a person who has grade A anxiety or grade A depression and has no other features of all these other things that are out there of OCD, PTSD? Like the brain all of a sudden, and the brain body connection starts to go awry because inflammation in the body, and because the vagus nerve starts to tighten up, and because cells become inflamed, and because hormones get released. Like, but yet we're trying to put the people into these categories. And then when we put people in these categories, here's what happens. They go, okay, the only people that can understand me are the people who've dealt with this exactly. And then that leads to then even, well, okay, only soldiers have PTSD, so only they can relate to one another. And it breaks my heart thinking of being a little kid going to the bagel store and seeing the guy with the VFW hat on and being like, why is he sitting at the bagel store by himself, but everyone else is with families and with friends? And why is he going to the, you know, the building over there, that the VFW building or the Knights of Columbus Center or whatever the different, you know, buildings they would go into? Well, we only know what we've been through because we've been through war. And we're okay. Well, the mother who lost her child, you know, through SIDS, that woman's been through war in and of herself. And that's not trying, I hope I'm not being derogatory towards servicemen and women in this conversation. What I'm trying to share is we've all been through wars in our own way.
Right.
And by opening up and having a perspective of that, now we can be comforted by anyone and everyone, as opposed to only these group of people who've been through exactly what we've been through.
Right.
We're finding commonalities, right? Commonalities that we all share aspects of suffering. None of us gets through, actually, none of us gets through early childhood unscathed. So even though we can't remember being born, I can't imagine that any child that is born of a natural childbirth has a pleasant time of it. I can't imagine that that's really a pleasant experience, you know? So, but one more thing, and then I'll be quiet. I just want to say that what you're promoting, you know, promoting a focus on mental health as opposed to stop the stigma of mental illness, that really isn't implicitly promoting a resiliency perspective, because what you're essentially saying is that it's expected in life that we will go through depression, we will go through anxiety, we will go through trauma, we will experience various hurts, and we can move through them and heal through them if we find commonalities with others, and if we're able to develop.
And if heal is too strong a word for some people, find ways to manage and do our best, right? And yes, the resiliency, I don't know if you guys saw that video that's gone viral with the two lighters, and the guy's showing the two lighters, and he says, both these lighters are human beings. And then he puts one of the lighters in water, and then the lighter can't light up anymore. He says, sometimes we lose our spark, but we need the spark from someone else. He lights the other lighter, and the one that was in the water then lights up again. And I think resiliency comes from so many different places. Part of resiliency could be, it feels like the world is ending. It feels like I have no light at the end of the tunnel, but wow, I've remembered those stories where people get help from other people, and I'm going to be resilient and hold on and hang on while my mother helps me, while my best friend helps me, while that doctor that's been really comforting helps me, knowing that there are lighters out there that can light our lighter. That's part of being resilient, is knowing that someone else can be what we need.
Yeah. So, Eric, thank you so much for your story. And I have two questions. One is, you touched upon it, right? So like here you are going through your stories and sitting in therapy. Did you almost feel a sense of guilt when your therapist said, well, you know, you've been traumatized, almost like, what are you talking about? I haven't been in war. You know what I mean? I think that like, it's almost when we, you know, we use the word, Dr. Miller and I discuss this all the time. We have a debate about suffering. Like somehow we don't have, who has the proprietary right to use the word suffering or trauma? You know, like, is that limited to certain beings? But you put a light on it by saying, like, you probably had a question. What are you talking about? I had the greatest life in the world. And then, you know, you mentioned your brother. You didn't realize. The other question I have for you is like, and I want to hear what you're doing now, but after you felt so much better, right? Because did there come a point in time where you felt better that you wanted to return back to your job? You wanted to get back into the game. So those two questions.
Yeah, the guilt part, you know, I didn't feel guilty only because it was a real, I was so at a loss for what was wrong with me that I was just happy to find something that could help. All the other explanations for wait for the guy behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz, to fix you. And then here's tools that you can do to work on yourself. I wasn't at the point of shame or guilt at all at that point. I was just like, give me whatever worked for me and is going to make me feel better. But I understand where shame comes in it for some people, because look, you know, I had lived a life that I can appreciate as things. It's not like I grew up in like an upper middle class. I grew up in like a middle class. My parents were teachers. You know, I shared that before. But food was always on the table. I never had to like want for anything. Like, I maybe had to do extra chores to get $10 to go out to eat instead of $5 so that I could get a Coke with my fries or something like that. But I wasn't deprived in any way. I think a realization that what I had lived through was traumatic was more of an epiphany, and something that like helped me be like, oh shit, there's a reason why I feel this way. And it's not just out of nowhere, and it's not just a genetic thing. So it was more freeing than it was anything that was based on, you know, any type of guilt or anything. In terms of going back into sports, you know, the only thing that I miss in sports is the run during the playoffs to get to win a ring. I won a ring with the Phoenix Mercury, so I guess that counts as one. I've been to the Stanley Cup final with the Devils, Western Conference final with the Suns. So I missed that part of it, but I'm sure you guys feel this doing what you do. The day-to-day of helping people,
Right.
I want you to think about this comparison. From a marketing perspective, when I worked in sports, I was bound to the 75-mile radius around my building. I wasn't allowed to market outside of that. The only products I was allowed to sell were tickets and sponsorships. Arena revenue is fine, and TV, but that's smaller because we didn't have as much direct say in that. And just my players and the direction our team was going. In mental health, the globe is my canvas. I can talk about mental health in any angle. If someone wants to talk about renewable energy, I can talk about how that impacts, you know, single mothers who have a tough time paying the electric bill and how much that plays in their mental health. I can get into that area. I can come up with logos and brand presentations that help people understand what this topic is. So the scope of what I get to work on is much wider. And then I'll just share that the way that you directly get to help people is a drug that's more rewarding and better drug to take than any alcohol. I've not really done hard drugs before in my life, other than when I was told to do ketamine that would help me. But I've never done other drugs. But I can't imagine a drug that's better than helping people. It just feels too good that I wouldn't want to go back into sports. I've had the opportunity of talked with friends about spots. If you gave me what probably was my dream job when I was a little kid, the president of the Knicks and MSG and the Rangers, I wouldn't take it just because I love doing this.
Yeah. So Eric, wow, great story. I'm sure there's so much more that I would certainly love to hear. The one thing that I gathered from what you're saying, and I think it's true for most of us, is that out of our adversities, really, we realize who we really are and, you know, can be in terms of our service to society. And that's what I'm getting from what has transpired with you, right? That experience has led you
I
to.
slide.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. Yeah.
You said it very well. I think it's, you know, sometimes people get upset because it's cliche to say the greatest valleys lead to the greatest mountains, or, you know, my biggest adversities lead to my greatest opportunities. But what I would say to people is, once you've conquered something, the way that your perspective shifts in terms of what are considered, you know, obstacles to have to get over in the future, it's like a joke to you. Right. Like, I remember working for the NBA and thinking, I got to present to team presidents and I'm only 22, 23 years old. Like, that's so nerve wracking. What if they think I did a bad job and I can't get an opportunity at a team in the future? And then all of a sudden it's like, well, okay, I just went through hell for 2.5 years and I felt like my brain was being raked across coals. Like, I'll present in front of 3,100 people and not get nervous about it anymore, because relative to that, look how much, you know. And so yes, your purpose gets carved out, and then also the resiliency that you build because of what you've been through. It's like it's kind of like training at the mile high, right? Like what they talk about in Denver. You're training in the hardest place, that when you come down to sea level, now it's like a joke compared to what it used to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're gonna finish shortly, Eric, but I just wanted, if you could just speak a little bit about Same Here Global and what its mission is and what it is you're doing and about coming to Citi Field, my hometown.
Sure. So Same Here Global is a mental health movement. It's, Same Here is an American Sign Language sign. You and I were the same. It's meant to be the opposite of Stop the Stigma. It's meant to show that all of us go through challenges and we can flash at each other. It's a mixture of alliances. So a celebrity athlete alliance, a doctor integrative practitioner alliance, an alliance of what we call STAR practitioners, stress and trauma, active release and rewiring. So people who are founders or lead researchers in things like havening and tapping and brain spotting and EMDR and all these modalities that unfortunately aren't mainstream yet. The call that I just got off of CEOs, and putting all those different alliances together to have each of them share their own story to show this tapestry of different people from different backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different geographic backgrounds, different age ranges, showing everyone's connection is that we all face challenges, and then plugging them into 5 areas of programming focus. So K through 12, we call Same Here schools. Colleges, we call Same Here sit downs. Offices, we call Same Here safe. Servicemen and women and first responders, we call Same Here service, not surprisingly. And then sports teams and leagues, we call Same Here sports. And so what you're describing with Same Here Citi Field is, I guess, lucky to have worked in sports, and maybe to your question, Nika, in terms of wanting to go back in or what's my purpose now. Well, maybe I worked in sports because I developed the relationships, not realizing what I'd be using for down the road, that now it's easy for me to pick up the phone and, okay, we can create a Same Here Citi Field night. So we're going to be doing a mental health awareness night called Same Here Citi Field, hats being given out, t-shirts being given out, doctors, Dwight Gooden will be there with us, bunch of different people from our alliance talking with their fans, educating Webb to what you were talking about. What is mental health? What is mental illness? Like, let's even get this all on the same page so we can start to work on this together and be all on the same team, rowing in the same direction.
Well,
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Eric, for coming in. And you really are the embodiment of resiliency and inspiration. So I'm humbled by your presence, and thank you so much for giving us your real story.
Yes.
No, I'm sorry I got to run. I told this group I do a training at 3 and I ran 5 minutes late, but I'm not out of lack of appreciation that I'm jumping off. Wanted to thank you guys for the conversation. So awesome seeing you guys again. And we'll talk to you a little bit. Okay.
I do want to say one other thing, like Same Here can also apply to Same Here in terms of resiliency, right? Like
Absolutely.
we all have Same Here resiliency ability.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I
that's
love
how that's how I look at it.
Yeah. Same Here isn't just the challenge. It's how we get over the challenge.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing
your
story with us.